Hello, everyone. Welcome. I see we've quite a few that have been signing in here a few minutes early, so glad you could be joining us this evening. We've got Dr. Seheult with us, and it's a very relevant topic for this time with future implications of COVID-19. So my name is James. We'll just give you a little introduction here before we have prayer and get started. So I live in Wildwood, Georgia, and I'm vice president at Wildwood Health Institute. I also work with a ministry called LIGHT, the Lay Institute for Global Health Training. And so I'm glad to be here. I'm just kind of hosting, moderating the health track on this ASI hour. So every week we have a different track. One is on ministry, one's on evangelism. This is our health week. And so we'll be doing this all the way up until the convention, which, Lord willing, will still take place. We're planning on it July 29 to August 1st or 2nd. I forget exactly, but that's in Orlando, Florida. So these evening webinars for the ASI hour is kind of preliminary for the convention and something that we may consider doing throughout the year. So we're just kind of testing this out and seeing what kind of response. Seems like it's been working pretty good. We've already have 30 attendees now. So it's great. It's a great thing for us to stay connected in between conventions and throughout the year, and to benefit from all the ASI members and ministries and speakers throughout the year, rather than just once a year at the convention and at our regional conventions too. So glad you could all be joining us. Why don't we have a word of prayer? It's 8 o'clock now, so we're going to start on time. This is called the ASI hour. So that's what we intend to do, is to keep it to an hour from 8 Eastern to 9. So why don't you join me, bow our heads for a word of prayer. Father, Lord, thank you so much for the opportunity for us to be connecting this way. And I'm so glad to have Dr. Seheult with us to help give some direction and some education needed for the implications of this pandemic of COVID-19. We just pray that you would be working your will in the world and in our lives, and help us to be following your lead. We just pray a blessing on Dr. Seheult, that you give him ease to present this topic to us. And we just thank you so much, and we just ask for your blessing in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Amen. So the title is Future Implications of COVID-19, and Dr. Roger Seheult is our presenter this evening. And so who's Dr. Roger? Dr. Roger has an excellent YouTube channel called MedCram that I only got to know about this year, and I've been really taking advantage of those videos. I think he's posted 88 videos alone on the COVID-19 subject, and they've just been really excellent. So I'm really glad. Thank you, Dr. Seheult, for being willing to also share on this ASI hour. So you can find out more about MedCram at YouTube. He's got 781,000 subscribers. So it's just really impressive how that's grown. And it didn't start just this year with the COVID-19. He's got all kinds of lectures. His passion is demystifying medical concepts to students and helping medical students, from what I saw, help get prepared for the MCAT. And he's got 50 million video views on his channel. So it's really a highly watched channel. Dr. Seheult is currently an associate clinical professor at the University of California, Riverside School of Medicine, and an assistant clinical professor at the School of Medicine and Allied Health at Loma Linda University. He's also certified in internal medicine. He's a specialist in pulmonary disease, critical care medicine, and sleep medicine and certified through the American Board of Internal Medicine. So super qualified for this subject, and it's been a blessing already, all the videos that you've been sharing. I don't know if you've all get a chance to see those, but you might go back, and if you want a really deep education, more full than this evening, you can check that out at MedCram on YouTube. So Dr. Seheult, the rest, I'm going to pass it over to you. Thank you so much for being with us. And just so everyone knows, you've got the chat option on the top right of this webinar here. You can be mentioning questions that we'll be answering closer towards the end. We also have some poll questions there that you can be looking at. I'll just throw out a test one there to begin with, so you kind of see how this is going. So we've got this question here that should be shown right now on your right there. Do you know someone that has been tested positive of COVID-19? So you can just click yes or no, and you can see there right away the answers to that question. So that's kind of a nice feature. We want to engage everyone through this talk. We've got a few other ones that we'll kind of sprinkle through the lecture. So, all right, Dr. Seheult, thank you so much. I'll pass it off to you.
Thank you, James. So yeah, as you said, we've been discussing a lot about COVID-19 and coronavirus. What's been interesting for me is I actually am a pulmonologist and treat these patients. And so when I saw this first come out in China at the earlier part of this year, it was not only learning about it so I could talk about it and make videos about it, but also so I knew what to do with the patients that I would be seeing as well. And so I was really motivated to understand this issue more than any other issues that we've ever talked about, and it was time well spent. So let's talk a little bit about COVID-19 overview and update where we are, and so we get the latest and best on this at this point. So, we are fully in pandemic mode here. We've got 9,400,000 infected worldwide, and that number is not slowing down. Here in the United States, we've got over 100,000 that have died. So we can see here the daily cases are going up in the United States, and we're no stranger to that. Yet at the same time, when we look at the daily deaths, that's been going down now for the last 8 or 9 weeks. And this is the big question: is why is this happening? And there's so many answers that potentially could be for this question. We've got a younger population potentially than we had in the first portion of this wave. We have also more therapeutics. We're ready for it. Didn't take us by surprise. It's more spread out. Although Texas, I understand today, Houston, Texas, have 5 ICU beds left in their entire city. So they are being inundated. Of course, Arizona and overnight California, and recently Florida as well. These are the hot spots. So where are we going? Where is this going to happen? What's going to happen? Let's talk a little bit more about it. So I kind of break up the course of the disease into 3 phases: phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Phase 1 is prior to infection. That's what physical distancing is all about. I hate that term, social distancing, because we shouldn't be really distant socially from each other, just physically. So that physical distancing is to try to prevent infection, and that's helpful in phase 1. Of course, not very helpful for the economy. But phase 2 is after you've gotten infected. And we can see there that there's a significant number of people, based on that poll that we're doing right now, that a lot of people know someone that's tested positive for COVID-19. There's about a 5-day incubation period, and then about a 7 to 10 days of a period of time where someone experiences symptoms. Then there's the admission to the hospital if it gets to that far, and where you get worsening shortness of breath, ARDS, ICU, maybe even death. That's phase 3. We've really been working a lot in this country and trying to treat people in phase 3, less so in phase 2. We're going to talk about that as well. If we look at the course of the disease, again, population, phase 1, infection. Phase 2, we have this 20% of the people who need hospitalization, who get hypoxemic, who require this sort of stuff, and then they go to the ICU, they get hospitalized. That's phase 3. That's where we're talking about therapeutics, medications, ventilators. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But notice, 80% of the people do not need to have hospitalization, do not need supplemental oxygen. The major reason for that is the immune system. So the immune system you've got to learn about in your body. There's 2 phases or 2 parts of that immune system. There's the innate immune system and there's the adaptive immune system. So as you get older, the adaptive immune system becomes smarter, bigger. It's seen more antigens. It knows what to do. It's got T cells. It's got B cells. It's made antibodies to these common infections that you've had. It's very strong. When you're young, you really depend on the innate immune system. The innate immune system when you're young is extremely powerful. It's very strong. As you get older, unfortunately, that innate immune system starts to ebb away. And we believe, based on recent data, that it is the innate immune system that is the key, one of the keys to fighting COVID-19. And unfortunately, as we get older, that innate immune system is weakened. But there are things that we can do to strengthen it. We've talked about this before. On MedCram, we've talked about things like, for instance, saunas, hydrotherapy, fevers. These are the tools of the innate immune system. And so the two key players there are the monocytes or macrophages and the natural killer cells. And there are things that we can do to manipulate those cells. For those of you who are history buffs, you'll know that Dr. Jauregg was the Nobel Prize winner the year before penicillin was discovered. And he found that when he took his patients with neurosyphilis and infected them with malaria, which they did have the treatment for, they were able to cure them of the neurosyphilis. Why? Because of fevers. So fevers were able to cure the patients of neurosyphilis, and then he simply treated the malaria, and they got better. He won the Nobel Prize in Medicine that year. But since the introduction of antibiotics, pills, infusions, antifungals, things of that nature, we didn't need to look at that. And so we've dropped that area of research, and we've gone down the path since 1920s of randomized controlled trials using medications in hospitals. And that's where we are today, but we find ourselves in a situation where there's not enough medications to treat all of the patients. And so the question we as physicians, as medical providers, but also our history as Seventh-day Adventists and what we used to do back in the 1918 pandemic in our sanitariums it's an interesting call from the past to see whether or not there's something we can learn there. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So here's a paper from Indonesia, that was actually Malaysia, that was looking at the innate immune system and how it related in the first SARS virus and in MERS, which came out in 2012. And basically, I'll just read the last sentence here. They say that these facts, the fact that there's acute viral replication, that there's pro-inflammatory cytokines, that there's similar changes in SARS-CoV-1 and SARS-CoV-2, that individuals susceptible to COVID-19 include those who are susceptible to diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease. All of this information, this was a Center of Excellence paper, showed that these facts strongly indicate that the innate immune system is a critical factor for the disease outcome in COVID-19. Furthermore, COVID-19, they found, suppresses that innate immune system. And part and parcel of that is also something called oxidative stress. We've been talking about oxidative stress a lot recently because of our understanding of the receptor for the SARS-CoV-2 virus and where it interacts, specifically the ACE2 receptor. So for those who don't understand oxidative stress, let's talk a little bit about it. You don't have to be a biochemist to understand it. In your cells, there's an organelle called the mitochondria. The mitochondria takes energy or makes energy from foods, sugars, proteins, and fats, and shuttles it from the citric acid cycle to something called the electron transport chain, where initially and at the very end, water or oxygen accepts these 4 electrons to make water. So there's a transfer of these electrons. If these electrons don't go very well, you can get oxygen radicals. And it's these oxygen radicals in high sugar diets, high protein diets, that can cause the type of oxidative stress that we see in the very people that are being hospitalized in the intensive care unit. People with diabetes, people with hypertension, people with coronary artery disease. And so what's felt is that these people who have a predilection for oxidative stress are the ones that are being tipped over the edge when they get infected with with SARS-CoV-2 and cause COVID-19. So before we go on, I'm going to talk a little bit about what specifically happens with the infection. James, is there another poll question that we want to pop up to break things up a little bit? Because we just went through a bunch of stuff there, and I want to make sure we're sort of taking a deep breath.
Sure. This one is, if we know anyone that's been hospitalized with a severe case or has even died from COVID-19. So that's another yes, no. Interesting. Of the first question, we had more of us know someone that's been tested, 23 versus 15 that don't. So with this one, wow. So it's about half and half that have actually known someone that's been hospitalized with a severe case or have actually died from it.
And this is not surprising. You know, a lot of people are tested positive, but they don't need hospitalization. Here, it's almost on par. That's interesting. Okay, good. So let's continue on. I've drawn this this schematic here because I think it's very telling. This particle down here, or this molecule, superoxide, it's a reactive oxygen species, and it's got something called superoxide. It's very detrimental to your health. And unfortunately, COVID is a perfect storm that causes it to increase. Why? Because COVID-19, or the SARS-CoV-2, knocks out the ACE2 enzyme, which is the receptor for that virus. And because of that, you have increased levels of angiotensin 2, which causes an increase in superoxide and a decrease in angiotensin 1,7, which decreases superoxide. And then COVID-19 itself causes a recruitment of PMNs, which causes more superoxide. So you can see what we're seeing here is people who are already have high hydroxy radicals, high oxidative stress. When they get infected with this, there is a super surge of oxidative stress potentially. And this oxidative stress causes inflammation, and that inflammation basically destroys the cells, releases factors, causes thrombosis. You know, we think about the ACE2 receptor in the lung, but there's plenty of ACE2 receptors in the vasculature. And if the virus gets into the vasculature, it's going to have a heyday. So that's where we are with that. And here's the body's antioxidant system. The body's antioxidant system is very important in trying to reduce oxidative stress. So we have catalase, we have NADPH oxidase, we have glutathione peroxidase. There is a host of other ones. These are supplied through vitamins like glutathione and acetylcysteine. They're also supplied through minerals like iron, like copper, like zinc. You might have heard a lot about zinc. And so this helps keep your antioxidant system up. And at this point, what the hypothesis is that SARS-CoV-2, this is what I've written down in one of our videos, decreases the ACE2 enzyme, which increases angiotensin 2, reduces angiotensin 1,7, increases superoxide, which causes endothelial cell dysfunction, increasing the von Willebrand factor, and that leads to thrombosis. And that's really what we're seeing a lot of in these patients who are on autopsies. They have thrombosis in the pulmonary arteries. We see that 9 times the amount of thrombosis than we see in regular patients on their autopsies from, for instance, the flu or from transplant lungs. So I think that's a really interesting thing. And we can see that here, recently published in the New England Journal of Medicine, Pulmonary Vascular Endothelitis, Thrombosis, Angiogenesis. And we can see here, here's the original article, that they found that alveolar capillary microthrombi were 9 times as prevalent in patients with COVID-19 than in patients with influenza. And here you can actually see a picture of these thrombosis right down here at the lung level. And that, of course, would prevent oxygen from being picked up. And that's a serious, serious matter. And that, of course, leads to extravasation of fluid, things of that nature. And you can see here, here's a CT scan of somebody with COVID-19 and the hypoxemia that they experience. I think it's a good point to maybe take another poll question. James, what's the next poll question?
Yeah, sure. You know, I was wondering if we should have a question feature here, and you can give us some quiz questions. You've got quite a bit of information here. We might need some notes on some of this, Dr. Schwab. So here's a poll question. Are you back to work after having to work from home? Okay, I've got it up right there. Are you back at work after having to work at home? So some of you maybe never had to work from home, but yes, back to work, no, still working at home, or never had to work from home. Okay, well, that's a good balance there. Yeah, I'm surprised the last one, never had to work from home, is the biggest. Got the biggest reply.
Yeah, so it seemed as though, based on the reports that we had that just about everybody was staying at home. But I kind of know, looking at even the traffic during the shutdown, at least here in Southern California, there was still traffic.
Yeah.
Of course, that's Southern California, though.
Yes.
Maybe not in Georgia.
Yeah, it hasn't been too much around here. Probably Atlanta. Okay. Yeah, well, there's still a lot of people that have been working. There's essential businesses, there's certain sectors that had to be closed down, but clearly not everyone. Here, only 6 are back to work, 10 still working at home, 19 never had to leave home, never had to go to work at home. So that's good. Well, Dr. Seheult, just while we're on that, that what I mentioned there, is there any way we can access any of these notes? I think we can go back and rewatch the video, because it's just
I could give you the PowerPoint presentation. Absolutely, we can.
Okay.
And all of this is stuff that we have talked about recently on MedCram. It's also available there as well. But I can certainly give you a copy of the PowerPoint presentation and make it available if you'd like.
Yeah, sure, that'd be great. And I'll share your YouTube channel on the chat here.
Great. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about management of what we're doing here in the hospital. At least we talked about those 3 phases: phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. Phase 3 being where we are actually treating patients in the hospital and trying to get them better. Usually by the time they get to the hospital, they're one of that 20%. They are requiring oxygen, usually, and they usually have fevers at that point. So there was the ACT trial that was published recently, had over 1,000 people that were trying to be registered for this trial. And they were enrolling patients, and they were giving this medication called Remdesivir. So you have to understand, first of all, what this virus does. This virus basically hijacks your cells and tells your cells to, instead of making proteins that are good for the cell, it hijacks the cell and tells it to make more viruses. And the way it does that is by taking something called RNA polymerase, and it basically takes the RNA to make more of its own RNA polymerase, to make more of its genome. And so this RNA-dependent RNA polymerase, which is coded for in the virus, can be shut down by throwing a monkey wrench or a brick into the system, if you will, and it just basically shuts down the system. Well, that monkey wrench or brick is Remdesivir. So you give Remdesivir, and it basically gets sucked into this machine called RNA polymerase, RNA-dependent polymerase, and it basically shuts it down, so it can't make any more viral RNA. So they recruited people. You get 200 milligrams on the first day intravenously and 100 milligrams every day after that for 5 days if you're not intubated or on a ventilator, for 10 days if you're intubated or on a ventilator. And they did this. And so what they did, just like any prospective trial, is they interrupt the trial, look at it, because it's blinded, and they make sure that they haven't reached an endpoint. Because if they've reached an endpoint already, it's unethical to continue the trial. You don't want to give placebo when you know something works. So that's what they did. And sure enough, they found that the endpoint had been reached early, so they no longer enrolled patients. And what they found was that the time to recovery was statistically significantly shorter, 11 days versus 15 days. The mortality hadn't quite reached statistical significance. I believe that if they would have continued to 1,063, and I think most people believe that if they had done that, they would have reached statistical significance on mortality. Even though they didn't, we think it's a good drug. They had about 1.5 million dosages available. They made that available for free. The company made that available for free. Gilead was the company. And so now it's allotted to us. We have a meeting every single day in our hospital that we have to go over all of the patients in the hospital who have been admitted, see whether or not they meet the criteria for Remdesivir, and make sure we're being good stewards of this medication and not using it unnecessarily on patients. So it's a very precious medication. It's not a magic bullet. Okay, so in other words, you've got to treat about 28 people with this medication before you save one life. Of course, it's worth doing if you're saving any lives, but in terms of the number needed to treat, The lower that number, the more effective the treatment. Obviously, someone's jumping out of a plane. You only need to treat one of people jumping out of a plane with a parachute to save one life. So a number needed to treat of 1 is an extremely powerful treatment. This is 28, and so it's not too off what most of our treatments are. And there you have it. So mortality in these patients were 8% versus 11.6%. And there you can see number needed to treat was 28. The problem is that you can't use this in renal patients because of the renal processing of this medication. So that's Remdesivir. The 1.5 million dosage are coming to an end quickly. So we're hoping that Gilead and other companies that are helping them ramp up their production, so we'll have those medications available. The big news in the last week, of course, is steroids. So in the last, I don't know, since this pandemic came out, we had some very early news from the WHO and a paper that was published in The Lancet that said, don't use steroids. Don't use steroids. And what was that based on? That was based on data, observational data in SARS-CoV-1, the original SARS back in 2002, that showed that steroid use didn't really help and it just prolonged viral shedding. So nobody really was using it except for some centers that really felt strongly. Like, for instance, the Chinese, there were certain Chinese centers that felt strongly, certain Japanese centers that felt strongly. Paul Merrick in Eastern Virginia Medical School came out with his MATH Plus, MATH Plus protocol, which includes Solumedrol. Well, the British were early on very interested in starting some prospective trials, and they had a big trial called the Recovery Trial. It stood for something I can't remember right now, but the Recovery Trial looked at a number of different medications and a number of different arms, and they had a control group. And so one of their subsections of the recovery was looking at dexamethasone, which is a steroid. And so they put that on there, and they also looked at it, and they felt that they had recruited enough people, about 2,000 people, to see whether or not steroids made a difference. And up to this point, really, the lay media and really the status quo was, don't use steroids. It's not going to be helpful. Well, what do you know? When they looked at the data, steroids were very helpful. In fact, so much so that the number needed to treat there was actually less than Remdesivir, which is an expensive medication. Dexamethasone is a dirt cheap medicine. It's been around for years, since the 1960s. And they found that for people who were not on oxygen, dexamethasone really didn't help. In fact, it may have hurt, because dexamethasone is an immunosuppressant. It's going to suppress your immune system. And that's not what you really want when you're trying to kick the virus. But later on, after the virus does its dirty work, it kind of ramps up the immune system. And it's the immune system that causes the problems that we see in COVID-19. It's the hypoxemia, the pneumonia, the quote cytokine storm. And so in those patients, we found that dexamethasone actually did do improvement. For those that were on oxygen, there was about a 3.5% reduction in mortality. That turned out to be a number needed to treat of 29. And on the ventilator, the sickest patients, who are the most hypoxic, they went from 40.7% down to 29%. That was almost a 30% relative risk reduction, and an absolute risk reduction of 13%, which works out to be a number needed to treat of 9, which is pretty good. You treat 9 people and you save 1 life, and it's pretty inexpensive medication. So that was what happened with steroids. And now, looking back, there's actually some data coming out of China that is showing that, yeah, steroids actually are helpful. And so this has really been a game changer here in the last week. For those hospitals that were already using steroids, we're not going to see much improvement. For those hospitals that were not using it, they are probably going to switch over. I should make a point that this data has not been peer-reviewed. It has not been published as yet. It has come out on Medical Archive. That's a website that publishes non-peer-reviewed, pre-published information, and it's being looked at right now. But the data is pretty convincing, and it's coming out of Oxford. And this is not a data set that we saw earlier that had to be revoked. This is out of their own data, and this is a government-sponsored study. So by all means, it looks pretty legit, and it makes sense. We are already using immunosuppressants in these patients to try to reduce the cytokine storm. It makes perfect sense that the dexamethasone would be beneficial, and fortunately, it seems to be at this point. All right. Well, we can. Do we have another poll number or poll to ask, James?
Yeah. Let me just get the next one up here. So, is everyone wearing a mask at your workplace? Is everyone wearing a mask at your workplace? Yes, no. Some people are, and no, I'm not. No, I'm not back to work yet. So this is the big political question, right? If you wear a mask, then you believe somebody should be president of the United States, and if you don't wear a mask, then you believe somebody else should be. It's ridiculous. Yeah, it's a big issue. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be a big issue, but it is. So do you think that it should be always worn indoors, or do you think the outdoors is even needed if you're around people?
Well, if you're outdoors, James, remember that you have an infinite amount of space for the virus to diffuse into. So your chances of getting infected outside are much less than they are inside. So that's number one. Number two is a mask is there to prevent a couple of things. Number one, when you talk, stuff comes out of your mouth. Those are droplets. Droplets have virus in it. You don't have to be a neurosurgeon, a brain surgeon, or a rocket scientist to know that if you're wearing a mask, you're not going to spread those droplets, and therefore there's less likelihood of you giving somebody else COVID-19. So what about the other direction? What about you wearing a mask? Well, the virus can come in two forms. It can either come to you in a droplet, or it can come to you airborne. If it's coming to you airborne, which is pretty unlikely, that mask that you're wearing is going to be useless to help you, because it's not filtering the air. It's just preventing droplets from getting into your mouth. Whereas if someone is talking to you and they're talking at the same height and a droplet goes into your nose or your mouth, a mask would prevent that from happening. So that's basically what it is. I've never seen any evidence that a mask causes your carbon dioxide levels to go up. I mean, unless you're exercising rigorously. I wear a mask all day when I go to the hospital. Of course, I'm wearing a different type of mask. I'm wearing an N95 mask because I'm going into COVID patients' rooms where there is airborne virus, because we're stirring up all sorts of things when we manipulate their airways. So interesting. So the question is, everyone wearing a mask at your work? And based on the 26 answers that we have there, it looks like the majority is still yes. Of course, that's a national, and we realize that different states have different regulations at this point.
Right.
Even different cities.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's talk real briefly about other things that we're doing in the hospital. So antibiotics, we're using them if we believe that there's a potential for a secondary infection. NSAIDs, we're trying to avoid those and trying to avoid Tylenol because that can bring down the temperature. Blood clots, this is a big question right now. I've seen patients that develop blood clots, as we already talked about, 9 times the likelihood of getting blood clots. So prophylaxis is helpful. Sometimes we do full dose anticoagulation, but we have problems with that when we do that with causing bleeding. What about convalescent plasma? So patients who have recovered from the virus, they have antibodies. We can take that plasma, give it to somebody else, and help their immune system out passively by trying to bind up the viral particles that they have using somebody else's plasma. So it's possible that could cause the person getting the plasma to not have a complete immune response. It's also possible they could have reactions to that plasma, but it could also be beneficial. So we really don't know at this point whether plasma helps. We're giving it under the guise of an experimental protocol, but we should have data soon. So we don't start with convalescent plasma because we don't absolutely know. In theory, it should work, but we don't actually know if it's going to work at this point. Again, the course of the disease, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. A lot of what we just talked about is happening in phase 3. That's in hospitalization. What about in phase 2? So there's some evidence that's being looked at. And I have to say, vitamin D looks as promising as just about anything else. So vitamin D is a hormone. It is very beneficial for reduction in acute lung viral diseases. There's a lot of data coming out of Great Britain, a lot of data coming out of Ireland that shows that supplementation with vitamin D can reduce the risk of acute chest infections by about 50%. There's also a lot of good data that shows that patients, when they come into the hospital with COVID-19, those that have low vitamin D levels are associated with a much, much higher mortality than those with normal vitamin D levels. We don't know if that's causative or whether it's associative at this point. We also know that there is a disparity, there's a disparate number of people with colored skin getting differences in terms of mortality as well. Now, there's a number of potential reasons for that. There's always the access to healthcare. There is the economic. There's also the jobs that they tend to hold, which is usually around more people. But there was an interesting study that was done recently that looked at Great Britain. And in Great Britain, they have a socialized healthcare where everybody has access to healthcare. So that's taken out of the equation in that situation. There's still, of course, the other issues, but they found clearly that there was a higher incidence of mortality associated with people from Africa, people associated from the Caribbean, also of Asian descent as well, that had a higher mortality in COVID-19, despite the fact that they had access to healthcare. And the question then then they looked at vitamin D levels in these specific countries of Europe and also of Asia. And there was a direct correlation between the average vitamin D level in that country with the mortality rate associated with COVID-19 in that country. Furthermore, there was also an association where they looked at the average vitamin D level in Great Britain itself and in Europe with patients who were white and then non-white. And there was a statistically significant decrease in vitamin D. And it makes sense why that would be the case, only because that the more colored your skin is, the harder it is for the ultraviolet light to penetrate deeply enough to make that vitamin D that it needs from cholesterol. So putting all of these things together, it seems very, very logical to suggest, especially to those people who are darker skinned living at higher latitudes, meaning further away from the equator, that vitamin D supplementation makes sense. And in fact, in the UK, the ministers there are encouraging the scientists to do a randomized controlled trial looking at vitamin D. I can tell you, James, personally, in the patients that I see, every single COVID patient that I see gets supplemental vitamin D as soon as they come into the hospital. I'm not taking any chances about vitamin D deficiency. So I think vitamin D is really big.
You'd recommend everyone to just take a supplement?
Well, that's a very good question. So the problem is, as we just said, it's different for everybody. Right now, what I would recommend is if you feel that you are deficient, you probably ought to talk to your doctor and see whether or not you should be tested. And then if they do put you on supplement, make sure you get retested. And the reason why I say that is because it's possible to overdose in vitamin D. You know, they did a meta-analysis in the British Medical Journal a couple of years ago. And what they found was that, yes, a modest, regular supplemental dose of vitamin D was helpful. What was not helpful was when people took mega doses of vitamin D when they got sick. That was not associated with an improvement. So you've got to be careful with vitamin D. Don't just start taking mega doses of vitamin D thinking that that's going to save you. Mm-hmm. You need to do it in a smart way and make sure you're following up with your doctor.
Okay, good. You want to do another poll question?
We can. Let's just quickly finish this this slide here real quick. So vitamin C, lots of good data. None really in COVID-19 specifically, lots of data in ARDS, which is the lung disease that people get. Also a lot of data in septic shock. Quercetin, we have data in Ebola. There's a couple of scientists looking at it, one from China, one from Canada, to see if it helps. It's a zinc ionophore. It gets zinc into the cell. Zinc, apparently in high concentrations in the cell, also shuts down coronavirus RNA-dependent RNA polymerase. Zinc, we don't have to talk about that. We just talked about that. It's very helpful. BCG vaccine is also being looked at. It may strengthen the innate immunity, even though it's designed to strengthen the adaptive immunity. Proning when awake, so making sure you're laying on your belly, can also be beneficial. We do that with patients in the hospital that are awake, those that are on the ventilator, and we notice an improvement in oxygenation if they're stable enough. There's the vaccine. We can talk about that. We've got really nothing right now. We're hoping that one comes out before the end of the year. Moderna is making an RNA-dependent vaccine. That one basically didn't skip animal trials, but let's just put it this way. They're doing animal trials at the same time that they're doing human trials right now. And so that's always a little bit interesting. And it's all in the name of warp speed. There's 5 companies that are being targeted by the government to make sure they get their vaccine to market by warp speed. That's in less than a year. Prior to this, the record for getting a vaccine to market, 4 years. That was the absolute land speed record for a vaccine. So we're going to crush that if we do that here. We'll have to see about the safety and the efficacy. N-acetylcysteine is another medication we've talked about in the past in terms of reducing reactive oxygen species like we've talked about, but it could also break up some of these clots because it is a thrombolytic when used intravenously. And then they're looking at famotidine. Real quickly, immunity-enhancing interventions. I don't have to tell you about what Adventists did in 1918 with the pandemic. If you want more information about that, go to our MedCram updates 46 and 47. You will learn all about what happened in the 1918 pandemic, where the Adventist sanitariums actually had better mortality rates than the Army hospitals in dealing with this pandemic. There was no antibiotics or randomized controlled trials, just aspirin. That's what they were using in the Army hospitals. In the Adventist sanitariums, no aspirin, rest, hydrotherapy. They got better results. We're also looking at natural killer cells, sleep, and nutrition and oxidative stress. And real quickly here, we'll just end with this, and then we can go to the poll questions. Oxidative stress is going to be the key, I think, when we look at this, because increasing oxidative stress makes you look like this man here on the left. And these are the people that I'm seeing in the ICU: obese, hypertensive, diabetics with kidney issues. Whereas these people I'm not seeing too much of. These are the people that seem to be faring well with the oxidative burst or oxidative stress burst that they're getting with COVID-19. And why? It's probably because they're well able to tolerate that burst more than the person who already has a tremendous amount of reactive oxygen species. So James, with that, that's pretty much my presentation. Let's take a look at the poll questions, and then let's just go to some questions from the audience.
Okay. Yeah, and so this pandemic has affected people in a lot of different ways. So there's a couple of questions more on a business side. So how many have had to make a significant change or decided to make a significant change in investment strategy? I know we have a lot of professionals and those related with in business. And I wonder if I can have 2 going at once. Let me just try this. No, I can't. So while you all are filling that one out, let me just remind everybody to be typing any questions. I'm sure there's questions that have come up. It's pretty. Everyone's been pretty much thinking about this for months now. So if you have questions, put that in the chat. Looks like there's a good balance on the investment question.
I see a lot of no's there.
Yeah. So
nobody's changing their 401ks over to bonds. Maybe there are some.
Yeah, there's a good mix there, and it definitely, I think it would make someone think, right? The next question that I'm going to put up here. Let's see how I can close that. There we go. So, are you making any significant change to your business or career for those that are not directly in business? So it's more of an open-ended question. Have you had to make any significant change, or are you planning any significant change, considering what's going on in the world and the effects of this pandemic? And then if you can be putting your questions in the chat That would be really good. We've got just one more poll question. After that, we could maybe wait and let people fill those out. I think once I close it, you can't fill out the other ones. So you mentioned.
So people are pretty resolute, maybe because they made the right decisions already.
Yeah, praise the Lord. That's a good sign that we've got some stability, and there's a hope that things will get back to normal. I can say from at Wildwood, we're running a lifestyle center, and we have made change because we're doing more things online and trying to help people from online, like more like at-home health, lifestyle type programs. And I know UT Pines has been doing that, and Weimar as well. And so that's something that we, in our area at least, we've done that. But it's been a challenge because numbers have been down, but we were thinking people that seem to be quite affected are overweight, like you mentioned, have diabetes or hypertensive. So like we're here to help them, but then they're afraid to travel, and so our numbers. This next session has come up, so maybe we're getting a little bit over that, but by and large, it looks like people haven't had to make significant change. So that's good. Interesting how both of those poll questions pretty much landed the same way as far as investment, 23 to 10 or 70% to 30%, and about the same for the business question. So if someone contracts COVID-19, you mentioned hydrotherapy more as like immune boosting, kind of like strengthening for preventing from getting it maybe, but once, let's say someone's been contracted, of the virus, would you advise heating treatments, Russian steam bath, or hot and cold showers, or anything specific in that area that you've?
Well, I know I would do it. I think that this is the perfect type of thing that can be done in conjunction with standard medical care. It's not a instead of, but an all of the above type of thing. So a great website for those who are interested. I know ASI has a great website for this, and I found another one as well. It's really easy to remember. It's Hydro, the number 4, COVID. Hydroforcovid.com is one, and I know you've gotten together, James, with Rodney, and I think he's got a nice website up as well that goes over hydrotherapy as well.
That's right. Yeah, we should share that here. So from those videos, we were doing hot foot bath. There's also something that I got online, just kind of preparatory for this for me and my family. There's like a little Russian steam bath thing that kind of pops up. So it's kind of mobile, and it's got a little steamer, little like pressure cooker that you fill with water, and it's got a tube that puts the steam in. So it's kind of handy. So that's been kind of just to kind of be ready, just in case it hits us, that we've got things in the house. You can use your shower and you can use hot foot bath, but
well, I'll tell you what I do. I've got a spa that we bought a number of years ago that we hardly ever used, and then during this pandemic, learning about hydrotherapy, I was never really into hydrotherapy. I have to tell you honestly, James, I'm a product of Loma Linda University, but I was a product after all of the hydrotherapy people graduated and left. So I was treated like a regular allopathic doctor. I graduated. I have to say though that I did have a couple of sessions with Dr. Ben Lau. He was our microbiology teacher, and it's so refreshing to talk with him again after about 20 years. But no, when I left, I went into pulmonary critical care, and I always mused that in a disaster, I would be useless. I can write orders, I can tell the nurses what to do, but if there's no electricity, there's no bed, there's no medicines, I can write all I want. Nothing's going to happen. So I became keenly aware of that, started to research more and more about these topics. And I'll tell you, that spa that has been sitting in the corner of the yard is now up and running just about every single day. I come home after seeing COVID patients, strip down in the garage, put on my swimsuit, immediately go into the spa, which is set to 104, which is the maximum that you can set it to here in the United States. and I do my 20, 30 minutes, try to heat up my core body temperature, and then I get out and then do a contrast shower with cooling my body down to lock that heat in. So a cold shower at the end. And so every day I am trying to augment my immunity, my innate immunity, like Joreg did back in the 1920s when he was treating his patients with neurosyphilis, with malaria, and then treating them for the malaria after the fevers got rid of the neurosyphilis. And there was many ways that he could do it. In the article that I was reading, there was heat cabinets, similar to what we're doing. They even mentioned hydrotherapy. And so this was well known, well versed. The top physicians in the world at the time, the Kellogg's, these people, Dr. Rubel, who was the medical director of the New England Sanitarium, later became the president of the College of Medical Evangelists out here at Loma Linda, wrote up what the experience was in 1918. And based on the numbers that he shares with us, the real key that they had the advantage over in their Army hospitals, in comparison to the Army hospitals, was the fact that they could prevent pneumonia in the sanitarium. Because once the patient got pneumonia, it was about a 50-50 shot of living or dying. What the sanitariums in New England were really good, much, much better than the Army hospitals are doing, was to get on and preventing the pneumonia. And how they did that was they didn't have to worry about testing. They didn't have an influenza test back in 1918. As soon as the patient felt ill, boom, they were on it right away, giving the patients hydrotherapy, resting them in bed, heating them up, cooling them down, doing all of the things that they do with the hydrotherapy that you'll learn about when you go to the website. And so very little lead time. They were on it right away. And so what happened is that they could prevent pneumonia. What were they doing at the Army hospitals? They thought the fever was killing the patient. The very cry for help that the immune system was doing by heating up the body, they were giving loads of aspirin to these patients. So number one, taking away the fever. And number two, a lot of them died because of aspirin toxicity. And that was the dichotomy that we were seeing in 1918, 1919. And Rubel does a really good job at describing that in some of the Adventist literature that we now have today.
Very good. So we do have some questions here. Well, we got about 10 minutes left. From Nicole, there's one that says, in your hospital, how many people recover from COVID-19 on average?
Well, that's an interesting question. We were just looking at that data, and we looked at it since Remdesivir was introduced at our hospital, which is, I work at a community hospital in Redlands. And I would say about 75% of the people that are coming in are being discharged based on at least the ones that are getting Remdesivir. Not all of them are getting Remdesivir because they don't all qualify for that. But in terms of who is getting Remdesivir, we're getting about 75%. And that's a rough estimate. I'd have to look and see. It's plus and minus.
Okay. From Deborah, she asks, would you comment on why the CDC states that exposure risk goes from low to medium if one does not have goggles or a face shield to protect the eyes, even if you have a procedural or N95 mask on?
Yeah, and the reason is because right where the sclera meets the cornea, so that's like right around the iris, that's the colored portion of your eye, are exposed ACE2 receptors that can pick up the virus. So you can get the virus by having particles go into your eye.
And so also, you be careful not to be rubbing your eyes and stuff, right?
Absolutely.
So let's see. Do you expect a financial downturn? Could this lead into more end time scenario where we can't buy or sell? And that kind of leads right into a poll question. So maybe Roger, if you have a comment on that, I'll throw up this other.
Yeah. So basically. So I've noticed that people are not accepting cash. That's a little bit interesting because they think that cash is going to circulate the COVID-19 virus. So if we're getting away from cash. Now we're looking at credit cards. We're looking at things we're even looking at biometrics. These are all things that are now going to be considered a necessity to prevent deaths. So that's an interesting thing of the greater good and getting rid of these things. So that's a very good question. Is COVID-19 kind of, is it just another benchmark along the timeline towards the end that's going to be like a September 11? Or, so in other words, is COVID-19 the end of the beginning? Or is COVID-19 the thing that's going to trigger all of the calamities that are going to cause all the things that we've learned about in Sabbath school and church in terms of the Sunday law, the little time of trouble, etc.? In other words, is COVID-19 going to be the beginning of the end? So here's the question. Do you believe that COVID-19 is the end of the beginning, just another benchmark along the way like 9/11? Or do you believe that COVID-19 is the thing that's going to now usher in the end? Is it the beginning of the end? That's the poll question.
Okay. Well, our audience is, the ones answering are pretty clear. They feel like it's the beginning of the end, a catalyst for end time events. But we still have a lot thinking about it. It's kind of a heavy question. There's still half that haven't answered it yet, but it's still rising here pretty significantly. So, yeah, well, you know, it's one of the signs of Jesus' return would be pestilences. So it's a clear sign. But yeah, well, we'll have to wait to see how much the events that will be taking place soon.
I think everybody should read Matthew chapter 24 carefully. And I think when you get to the point, have you noticed, James, in the media where people are getting more offended at what people say, and they don't have the patience that they used to? You know, that was predicted in Matthew 24. It says that people will become more offended and the love of many will wax cold. Right before that, it says that, and you remember this, nation will rise up against nation and kingdom against kingdom. Now, to us, that sounds like it's the same thing. It's kind of a redundant thing. A nation is a kingdom. But if you look very carefully at that word nation in the Greek, you will see that the word there for nation is ethnos. It's ethnic nation. It's not a political nation rising up against nation. It's races rising up against race. And isn't that the truth of what we're seeing here? You know, it says there in Matthew 24 that that's not the end. There's a little bit more time, but it's the beginning of the end. So I think our listeners here are intuitive in that sense. This very well may be where we are, not just because of COVID-19, but because of everything else that we're seeing as well.
Right. Yeah. And things have been building for quite some time now. So yeah, we couldn't blame it all on that. But okay, I'm going through some more questions here. Sorry if I missed one. But let's see here. There was one on, should I take a hot and cold shower every day or on a regular basis? Is it better in the morning or in the evening?
Well, you know, I used to do this. I used to get up in the morning and have a shower in the morning and then go to work. Now what I do is I have a shower in the evening. And if you're like me, I do it every day. Hot shower and then followed by a cold shower. If you look and see what Weimar is doing, they recommend a formula. I don't have a lot of evidence for it, but they kind of stick to it. And so I got to sort of take their word for it. 5 minutes hot, 1 minute cold, 3 minutes hot, 1 minute cold, 3 minutes hot, 1 minute cold. That's their formula. It takes you to about 14 minutes.
Yeah, I can see that. And I've done a lot of hydro. It takes a little bit. The first one, you'll kind of want to warm your body up, but on the first run, so I can see it being a little longer. And then you start getting really hot. So the third one, 3 minutes is usually.
They tell me that you want to get it hot so that you're actually looking forward to the cold part.
Yeah, that's how I feel. Not everybody feels the same way because it depends on your cold.
And then I would mention there, James, that that's not for everybody. Because of the cold water, it kind of can race your heart rate and it can cause an adrenaline surge. If somebody is susceptible to getting cardiac arrhythmias and things of that nature, you may want to check with your doctor before doing that. Yeah.
Good idea. Okay, we're drawn to a close here. Any other research regarding hydrotherapy?
You know, we're in the midst of doing that right now. There is a group down in Tennessee that's looking at that right now. They're actually doing a randomized trial looking at hydrotherapy in the hospital. We, at one of the community hospitals that I work at, we're not doing a trial. We're just doing it. We're using physical therapists it's called a hydroculator. and it heats up these pads that the physical therapists use for muscle aches, pains, things of that nature. And we're using it on patients there. So the patients love it. They ask for it.
Yeah, it's really, I'm not surprised. Yeah, I think downtown Chattanooga at Erlanger, there's some experimental going on. There's several Adventist.
Dr. Nelson.
Dr. Nelson, yeah. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing results from that. Last question here. How confident are you that any of these vaccines developed at warp speed will be safe?
Don't know. It's we're really trying to cut corners. Sometimes corners can be cut and you get the result that you want. But as they say in England, not only is the proof in the pudding, the proof is in the eating of the pudding. So we'll see what happens when we actually get the vaccine out. Okay.
Good. Well, Dr. Seheult, we really appreciate you taking this time out of your life to be with ASI Hour. I just want to remind everyone that this is a weekly thing. So next Thursday evening, same time, there'll be another webinar, and that'll be on the topic of ministry. And Stephen Grabner, who's the president of OCI, Outpost Centers International, he's going to be sharing on the dynamics of high performance teams. So that will relate to both those in ministry and in business. So the dynamics of high performance teams, Stephen Grabner next week. If you have to learn more about this topic, there are 88 videos waiting for you at MedCram on the YouTube channel, and so enjoy those. There's one last poll question. Sorry, we added one here. How many believe that this pandemic? Oh, sorry, that was my fault there. Here it is. Will you take the challenge to invite others to join us for the ASI Hour next week? Amen. So please try to invite somebody. What I did this evening quickly was just shared it on Facebook. If you could do that as well when you see an ad, we'll try to get more ads out ourselves on our end. But if we can share those around, and the more interest in this thing, the more we're going to keep doing it. So thanks for everyone's support in doing that. And we'll try to hold to our title here, ASI Hour. And thank you again, Dr. Seheult. Bless you. And let's have a word of prayer together now. Father, Lord, thank you so much for this time we could spend this evening. And thank you for blessing Dr. Seheult and the practice that he has. Continue to protect him from this sickness and give him wisdom in treating those that are sick. And thank you for all the research that he's done. Continue to bless and guide him. And we know that you hate to see this kind of suffering, and give wisdom to us, Lord, on how we should be living and behaving, and the precautions that we need to take. Help us to use this as a time that we can take better care of ourselves, and also to grow closer to you. So in turn, trying to make this whole thing into a blessing. And we all sense, and we can see that in the poll here, that we sense we're living in the last days. So above all things, help us to be faithful to you, Lord. And we just thank you for your mercies and your grace to us. You are a good God, and we thank you so much for your love and your care. And we just ask for your blessing on each one that has signed in tonight. Go with us now, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All righty. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night. And thank you
again. Good night.
Well,
thank you.
Bye-bye.